Today's topic is going to be third-party APIs. Now, before we kind of get started, you're going to hear you've either heard or you will hear the term API being thrown around quite a bit. Does anyone have any idea what an API stands? What the acronym API stands for?
Application Programming Interface.
Yeah. So API. Yeah, that's right. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. What does that even mean, though? So it's kind of like you hear these fancy terms being thrown around, but what is an application programming interface?
Sort of like a roadmap for how to access their information. Or like if you wanted to pull stuff into your application, and you use their information, or have your users be able to like connect to their accounts somewhere else, like Venmo we were talking about before. It's like here's the things you need to do. Here's how you need to access the information.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yeah. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's basically how you talk with another piece of software. And it's kind of like in real life situation, there is a way that you talk with the child. There's an API to talk with the child, right? Your voice might get a little bit more high pitched. You might talk with different vocabulary than you and I are speaking right now. You might use much more enthusiasm like this, or like have like funny facial features. And there's a way that you interact with children. There's an API for children. Whereas when you're dealing with like a high-ranking official, like let's say you ever got to meet someone even if you got to meet the president, there's an API to talk with the president, right? You're very formal. You're dressed up. You are on like the best possible like social behavior that you. What's that?
More.
Yeah, it depends on.
But let's put we talk to a president, right? There's a way that you present yourself. There's an application programming interface. There's a way that you communicate and you have a dialogue back and forth. So that's in the real world. Even when you're talking about like programming, you've actually already been doing this. So there's the Faker gem.
It's when you just pretend like you're an 8-year-old kid.
Well, this is going on YouTube, so maybe we'll hold off on any.
Can we erase that comment?
Whoops. Even when it comes to software, you've been dealing with APIs all this time, even if you know it or not. Now, some APIs are very, very simple, and some APIs are much more complex. We've been dealing with very simple ones so far. So to use the Faker gem, you had to read the documentation. You had to go into the GitHub page. You had to read all of this documentation. You had to say, what's going on here? Oh, okay, so I know that if I do Faker : address.city, this will give me a city. Or if I do like Chuck Norris facts or something like that, there's a way that I can interface with this particular piece of software to get me what I want. And if you go further down the page on this one, it says like this is how you use it. Like this is the way that you're gonna integrate my software into your application. So whether or not you know it, you've been using APIs up to this point. Now, these are very simple APIs. Like the setup is very minimal. And obviously, as you get more and more advanced with things like, if you go to eBay, there's a checkout with PayPal, right? There's a whole integration with PayPal that they've set up on the back end. There is like a charge your friends with Venmo. Or if you go to like Papa John's website, you can pay with Venmo instead of paying through their application. That's an example of a third-party integration. Are there any other third-party integrations you can think of?
Early Google Maps.
Yeah. You go to any like
restaurant and you click on the map.
All those sign-ins, right? Or if you can sign in with Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. That's another third-party API integration. So you've had to like if you go to like OpenTable.com, you have the ability not to sign up with OpenTable, but you can sign up and sign in with your Gmail account. So they say, I'm going to pass off all the authorization stuff over to Gmail rather than take care of it myself. So these are all really great examples. So we have 3 windows today, our browser, code editor, and then the terminal right here. I've downloaded an app called Public Art. Now this is what you're going to be dealing with today. So we're going to bundle install everything. I'm going to YOLO to save some time, but please do not do this on your own. let's kind of look at what we've got here just to get us started. It looks a little pretty because we're using Bootstrap CSS and everything. We have all that same like before filters to make sure that you're signed in before you do anything. But essentially what this is there's many examples of public art that are available around the city, right? So I'm going to sign up real quick. So I have this saved over from last week. So I have Kara at kara.codes, and my password's 123123. I'm just going to sign up here. And it's essentially just a small CRUD app where I'm able to create locations, create, read, update, and destroy locations. Now, and these are going to be locations of any sort of public art that you might find around the city. So the first one I'm going to have is probably, we're going to create a new location. And you can take a look at our RESTful routes up here. Location/new is the form for a new location. I'm going to call it the Bean. And I'm going to, I think it's at Millennium Park in Chicago. And it's actually called Cloudgate. But it looks like a giant bean. But it's the formal name is Cloudgate for the bean.
Was that an immediate thing? Like as soon as the public saw it, they were like, "Guys, the bean."
I don't know. I haven't been around Chicago long enough to.
How do you know?
I think, yeah, if it was released, it was the bean like that.
So as of right now, if I create this location, the location was successfully created. I got this logout button. Everything is more or less the same in terms of the code. So if I take a look at my routes, you can see I have my devise, I have my resources. So it's everything that you're more or less used to. If I look inside of my controllers, inside of locations controller, this is all the stuff that you're used to. Like it's going to show me it's going to show me the specific location. It's going to give me the new location. It's going to post and create the location. But this is a very boring app right now. So if I go to just Chicago Art Tracker, it just lists all of the locations I have. I can view each individual one and read them. I can edit it if I need to, and I can destroy as necessary. But when I take a look here, there's not much going on. And I'm thinking, man, wouldn't it be nice to maybe get some Google Maps or some sort of third-party integration into my application? Because right now this is boring. No one would ever want to come here and use this. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to learn how to use, there's almost every single large online servicer is going to have their own third-party API. PayPal's got one, Braintree has one, Venmo has one. You probably have an Amazon, like a checkout with Amazon or like pay with Amazon as a thing. There's there's stuff for SoundCloud, there's stuff for Spotify. Like there's an infinite number of third-party APIs out there. The easiest one for us just to kind of get ourselves warmed up to it is the one from Google Maps. So you can kind of take a look. This is an example of really, really good API documentation. They tell you exactly what you need. They're going to tell you exactly what your outcome is going to look like. And then they tell you actually how to put it in as well. So it says like basically if you're using this API, you can put an interactive map, street view panorama on your site with a simple request. You can embed it pretty easily as well. So they give you this little piece of code here. And essentially what they're doing is saying like when you put this code in here, this is what's going to show up on your page. And you've seen all of these on people's like websites and things like that you can put in maps. So this is an iframe, which is just a small little frame on your HTML page. And it gives it a width and a height, and it says like this is where I want you to go. And this right here says your API key. Now there's a few ways that you can connect with third-party APIs so that they know who you are. Now you're not going to be sending over your email address and your password for a number of reasons. You're not going to verify that it's like John at Code Platoon and my password's 12345. One, because it's not secure, and two, because if I ever leave the company, then that's associated with my account. Then my email might not exist anymore. I could have worked there 5 years ago, and it's still associated with my account. So how they verify people is using API keys. So it's like API being application programming interface. When I sign up on Google Maps API, I will have a specific project and a specific API key. Let's just kind of see what that looks like. So maybe I will do, this is not the right one. my API key here. Yeah, we'll just do that. So let me just copy this real quick, and we'll examine what we have. So this giant ugly string that I have here is the API key that's associated with my account. What's that? So it says when I refresh this page here, it says your API key, and it just says click here to insert your credentials.
Oh. Okay.
So you'll create a project, and then from that project they will give you a specific API key that you can use freely. Now your API key is associated with your specific account, so that means like Taylor has a specific API key for Google Maps, and Mickey has a specific API key for Spotify, connecting with Spotify or something like that, or YouTube or anything of that nature. So that key is specific to you, and you want to protect that at all costs, because if I have your Amazon Web Services like key, I could probably charge the crap out of you and like use your key to basically say like I'm going to mine Bitcoin or something for 4 hours or something along those lines. You want to protect this key as much as possible. But these API keys are specific to you. So there's two ways of doing it. One is just a key is going to be specific to your account, or you're going to need to pass in an app ID, which is basically your version of like a login email address, and then an app key, which is going to be the password. So yeah, that's essentially what an API key is. It's a unique identifier to you. All right, so so we have this bit of code right here, and we're going to get something out on the page.
Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry. So you get a specific API to make a person. So what happens when you leave the company? That's still your API key.
Can you ask the question one more time?
Okay, so an API key is unique to the individual who created this, right?
Yep.
So what happens when you leave the company and this still needs to run?
Sure. So the idea behind having a company specific API key or like a project specific API key is that anyone can like use that API key as long as they're working on that project. So I'm saying essentially before, it's like when you log in regularly, I might log in with an email and password, right? So I have like John at Code Platoon, and my password's 123123. This when I create a key and I log in with my email and password, I don't, like, generally speaking, you don't want to like authenticate people using if you're like making requests back and forth between a client and a server using like their API, you're not going to use an email address and a password going back and forth. You're going to be using a specific API key to like verify that they are who they say they are. So to answer your question, it's not necessarily when a person leaves the company, they're not the key that they use back and forth is not associated directly with that person. It's instead associated with the company.
So you just need to make sure that when you get an API, it is the company API, not individual.
Yeah, I mean it's or you can just kind of like share that API key or like use it, and I think you'll understand a little bit more when we get like halfway through this material. But essentially what it is, it's like you're not going to verify yourself with your personal email address and your personal password. You're going to be generating an API key that's going to be used for the entire app, so that it's like not married to you when you leave.
And the main reason behind those keys is just for charging. Once they hit the threshold of...
Yeah, it's essentially that's what it is. So it's kind of like there are certain APIs like Google Maps which allow unlimited hits per day, per second, or something like that. There's other ones called like we used one called Flight Stats API, which allows us to read into the FAA database up to 1,000 times total before they start charging us money. Every 100, they might charge us 1 cent per hit or something like that. We accidentally pushed our API key up to, like, when we deployed it off to Heroku, we accidentally left our API key in there, and the next morning we had a bill for like $40. It's a small amount of money, but we immediately took down the key because we didn't want to get charged any more money. So that's their way of identifying hey, A1ZASY is Jonathan, and Jonathan has a credit card on our account, and we're going to monitor how many times we see a request with this particular API key, and then we're going to calculate how much money to charge this person on that particular account.
So would you replace the API key with?
What's that?
For your the rope web?
So there's a way, we'll get to it, but essentially, like, you don't want to pass in your key, like, you don't want to hard code your key like this. You want to, like, put it inside of something called secrets, which we'll cover in just a second. We just kind of add the password as, like, this. But it's just you pass it in a different place, so you're not hard coding it, and when you push it up to GitHub. All right, so let's get, our goal right now is that we have this ugly thing. I want this to show up. I want a map to show up in some sort. So first things first, we're going to write some tests. Luckily, the tests are pretty much already written for us. So we have a locations controller spec. And under the show right here, I'm going to insert one more test that says it shows a Google Maps embedded on the page. So I'm going to create a location. I'm going to make a request to the show with these particular parameters. And I expect the body of this to include google.com/meds/map/embed. So I expect there to be a map on the page. When I run these specs here, you're going to notice that it does take a little bit longer. So right now it says it completed in about a little under a second, and it took about 6 seconds to load. And I have a failing test, and it says that I don't have Google Maps, like I don't have an embedded map on my application. And that makes sense because I haven't written the code quite yet. So I've got the code right here. I'm going to create a partial because I'm going to use it on many different pages, or I could use it on many different pages. So I'm going to do Google map.html.erb. Paste all of this code in there. And put it inside of the show. I put this in the wrong place, didn't I?
So not in layouts.
Not in layouts, yeah. And now I'm going to put it inside the show here. Let's put it after the address. Let's go back and refresh this. You can kind of see here I've got my bean and everything like that, and then all of a sudden underneath I have this small little iframe for the Google Maps. Now this is not really useful for me right now because even though I told it to go to the cloud gate to Millennium Park, but it took me to the Space Needle. Any idea why that is? If you take a look at the code that we have here.
Oh, it's querying.
Yeah, it's directly querying every single time, no matter what I type in. It's going to say the Space Needle in Seattle, Washington, because I've hard coded that. So I'm going to change that real quick, and you can kind of see in the controllers here. Where's show? Before the show happens, I have this before action called set location. When I jump down here, I have access to @location. Okay, that's pretty cool. In that case, since I can pass down @location, I'm just going to say interpolate @location.address. So if I refresh this page, hopefully it'll take on the address of this particular location record. Refresh. And there it is. So that's pretty cool. We have it reads in this address, it shoves it into like Google's API, and then we're loaded with this. So let's create one more, let's create another one. Maybe we'll create a new location, name another area of public art or just a building, it's fine. What's that? Sears Tower. Okay. I'm just going to write. No, it's if you're from Chicago, it's still the Sears Tower. I know somebody paid a lot of money, but it's okay. Technically, it's called the Willis Tower. I'm going to create this location, and if all goes well, it's going to save it into the database. And when I make a request to see this page, it's going to insert this particular address into the URL for the API request. Please don't blow up. Nice. So I created it. It makes a request out to Google Maps API, and then it inserts it inside of here. That's pretty nice. Let's fix up some of the tests so that we have a little bit more oomph in it. So it shows an embedded Google map on the page. So I create a location. So this is the given. What do I need to do to set things up? The when, what do I need to execute? And then what do I expect? I expect the body's request, the body's response to include the Google Maps. I expect there to be a specific address in there, and I expect my giant long key to be here. Let's see. Let's run this test and see what happens. Okay, something blew up. My long key went here. Okay, so I expect it to show Google Maps. So this passed. Oh, I see. They don't want me to put literally the string my long key went here, but instead they want me to take this and put it inside the spec. Let's go back, run the test one more time. Please do not blow up on me. Okay, so 17 examples and 0 failures. At this point, I kind of want to pause because I want to go back to the question that that we were asked a little earlier. It's like, what if when we pushed up our code on my final project, I pushed up my code. It included my API key inside the code, and the next morning I found that someone had, some people had found it using bots or Reddit or something like that, and then they just kept hitting the API over and over, saying oh, this is a pretty cool app, but we also got charged $40. Now we couldn't get out of it because we had our credit cards on file, and they were like, you legitimately used all these extra hits, so we each had to pay $10. So it kind of sucked. But you can kind of see there's an issue here. I'm kind of putting my secret key out for everyone to see if they are able to see my code base, right? It's located here. It's located here. I'm not really comfortable putting that out there. So basically what the developers of Rails did was they created a secrets file right over here. If you ever add if you ever need other maps, or if you need to change your key or something like that, you're going to have to edit it manually here and inside the spec as well. So that's two places you have to maintain it yourself. On top of that, you just kind of don't want it out there for everyone to see. So what I'm going to do instead is add my secret key over here. Okay, and I'm going to put the secret key in this space instead of the other ones. So I'll copy this. So we've given ourselves a bunch of extra flexibility by putting it inside of here. First, we can separate our secret data API keys on an environment basis. So it's if I have one specific for development, one specific for test, and one specific for production, I can separate those out. When you start integrating your app, it's for us, let me go back here. So let's go to onemainfinancial.com. This is an example of something I actually had to do pretty often. If you go to OneMain Financial, which is a company I used to work at, and you go to branch search, and this takes you to /branches, and you can go to all of these different branches. If I go to Arizona and I want to go to Casa Grande, all of this, this Google Maps thing is exactly what we did just a second ago. But we had, I think, over 1,000 branches, and managing it ourselves kind of became very, very problematic because we had 1,000 plus Facebook pages, 1,000 plus yellow books pages, which people actually still use yellow books or yellow pages, yellowpages.com. Like there's a whole bunch of other like social media things that were around each individual branch, and managing ourselves got kind of crazy. So we used a brand new service called Placeable. Oh, they got purchased. I don't know if it's still around. And essentially what we did was we allowed Placeable to manage all of our, maintaining all of those records for us. So we didn't have to do it ourselves. Now, what they gave us was they said, okay, here's a sandbox key. Like a sandbox being like when you're a kid and you play inside of a sandbox, it's a safe environment, right? Like you can fall down and it's on sand, so it won't hurt as much as if you were to fall down on concrete or something. It's supposed to be like a play box. So I give you an environment. They gave me a specific API key for development and for tests. I wouldn't get charged money based off of this. But the moment I start hitting it constantly for production, that's when we would start getting charged money. So it's kind of like, here's a dummy development key so that when we see that you've made a request from this key, we won't charge you any sort of money. But you can still test it all out as you're writing the software. So that's kind of what this development, test, and production are here for. So I'm going to change this real quick. So instead of hard coding my my API key, all I have to do is do rails.application.secrets.google API key. And what this does is it says when I'm going to load up the Rails application, look inside the secrets file and look for an API key. Look for the Google API key, like whatever I name it here. And it's going to automatically determine am I in development, am I in test, or am I in production, and then insert that particular API key inside of there. So I only have to change it in one place, and then I don't have to maintain it here, and I don't need to maintain it here. I can just do the same thing. Rails.application.secrets.google API key. Let's run the test, make sure everything passes. Okay. Let's kill the server here and start it up again just in case. And if all goes well, I can still refresh this and it'll still work. Fingers crossed. All right, that works. Let's just try one more just to make sure that this is absolutely certain. So we'll do code platoon. It's at 73 West Monroe, Chicago, Illinois, and that's only. Does this work? All right, here we are.
Can you show the code? The code actually shows, not the code, but I mean in the browser.
Are you trying to find the iframe?
Yeah.
Where are you, Google? There it is. So it interpolates it for us.
So that looks like your key.
It is my key.
I thought, okay.
So this since this is a GET request, it's inside of the URL no matter what. And for most, if you have an API key that's going to be put inside of the GET request, meaning like I just type it in and press enter, those are generally speaking okay to keep out there because they're not going to charge you any money. But when it comes to things that like I'm actually going to start getting charged money for, I'm going to put that inside of a post request. So I'm sending over information to Spotify or something with my app ID and my app key. At that point, those would be hidden or put in a digest of some sort. So once we add our maps for our locations, like we can actually see these maps, but sometimes people enter vague addresses like Chinatown, and if you're logged in on Google, then they know like kind of which Chinatown you might be talking about. But there's a Chinatown here in Chicago, there's one in San Francisco, there's one in New York. It's vague, so we might want to use something to I guess geocode what locations we're actually talking about. And for this, we're going to use what's called the GeoCoder gem. We're going to look through some of this documentation and read through kind of crappy documentation. So Ruby GeoCoder is a gem. This is an example of a third-party API because it's something you're bringing in, and it's still not API because you need to know how to use it. So it looks like all I really need to do is put the gem inside the gem file. Once I type in Eiffel Tower, I can get the latitude and longitude. But if I were to type in Chinatown, they might not know. But if I say Chinatown, Chicago, there's a specific Latin long for that. If I wanted to find like a hotel near Vancouver, Canada, there's an opportunity for me to use this code as well. When you are using Active Record, it says like, okay, you're going to need to, if you have on your model level, you're going to need to put in these couple lines of code. So I know eventually down the road I need to do that as well. There's a lot more stuff here. That's okay. So I'm going to add GeoCoder into my code base here. I'm going to go to the gem file, add gem GeoCoder, bundle install everything. And just like it said inside this documentation, if you're using Active Record on your model level, you have to add these two pieces of code. All right, that's fine. So I know I'm dealing with a location model. So I'll just add those little pieces of information in there as well. Let's run the test just to make sure everything still works. And everything blows up. That's kind of crappy. Let's see what it says. It says there's an undefined method latitude for location. I guess we didn't read the documentation very closely. Let's take a look at latitude. Okay. Let's go back to the first one. Given a venue model with known street address, automatically fetch and store in latitude and longitude attributes. Okay, so it appears that all of your models are going to need a latitude and longitude. So the ones that are using geocode need a latitude and longitude because it says, given a venue model with a known street address, it's going to automatically fetch the coordinates after you validate it and then store it in latitude and longitude on that object. Okay, shouldn't be terribly difficult. I'm going to add another migration. I'm going to generate a migration. It's going to be called add latitude and longitude to locations. This is going to create me a new file right here. And I'm going to add just a little bit of code to make this work. Create latitude and longitude. All right, so I'm going to migrate it now that I have it here. All right, and then run the specs to make sure everything runs. Now, everything passes, which is good, but there is something that we've noticed that I want people to notice. Let's take a look at this number right here. It says it finishes in 1.16 seconds, which is pretty fast. But if you go all the way up to like where it used to pass and everything was good, it took 0.79 seconds. So this is way slower than before. So this is 0.8 roughly, and this is 1.16. So you're talking about 0.3 seconds, which is not a ton when you think about it right here. But 0.3 out of 0.7, what's 0.3 divided by 0.7 is 43%. So you're basically what's happening here is you've just by adding that one GeoCoder gem, you've slowed down your test suite by 43%. And that's fine for right now because we only got 17 tests, only taking 1 second. But what if you had 1,000 tests, 2,000 tests, which is to be expected for a large company? It could be, I've literally sat in some places where the test suite took 45 minutes to run, you know, from start to finish because it tested every possible thing that the app could do. So 45 minutes times 0.43, 1.43 is like another, I don't know how long it is, but it's a lot of minutes that you're wasting just because someone has to wait for that test to run. So we want to speed this up a little bit. Let's close out some of these things so far. All right, so we want to, just by adding this particular piece of like GeoCoder, the issue is 1, we have no tests that GeoCoder actually works. 2, our tests are really, really slow. And 3, we're not going to be able to geocode anything unless we're connected to the internet. You know, we have to make new requests and get responses back every single time. So we're going to we'll tackle each one by one. So the first issue that we have is that there's no tests around GeoCoder. It's simple enough. So we will create a spec under location here. Just going to say this. It's going to geocode the model when you save it. And the way that I knew I had to do this is if you go up here, I have these 2 little validations from GeoCode. So I just want to test that that works. So I have a new location with an address and no latitude or longitude. It says the Eiffel Tower and things like that. And when I save it, I expect the location's latitude and longitude to show up. Okay, so when we run the tests, let me do bundle exec rspec. We get 1 giant failure. It says I expected the location's latitude to be 0, but instead I got this. Okay. Simple enough to change. And we have to put in the longitude as well. So we passed it, but it's kind of a crappy test because basically we're asserting that the numbers are extremely specific. This particular latitude and this particular longitude are actually accurate to within a millimeter of the actual location in real life. It's very unlikely that global lat and long is ever going to change, but if Google started counting the Eiffel Tower from like the northwest rather than wherever it currently goes from, our test is going to break for really no good reason. You know, if anything happens with like lat and long, hard coding numbers is always a dangerous thing because it has to be exact every single time. Kind of an interesting thing. Like this is extremely specific, right? And some places may not store decimal places to this extent. So I know for the company that I worked for, we only did it up to here, I think the first 3. And there's a huge difference between something with a latitude of 3 decimal points and one with 10 decimal points like it is right here. Actually, some people, because we were using GeoCoder, people were showing up like 2 blocks early. So they're like, I can't find it. I don't know where it is. You said it was on this particular corner. We're like, actually, it's like 2 blocks north. And we realized that the GeoCoder was actually cutting off everything besides like the first 3 because our database was set up incorrectly. So it's like you don't want to necessarily like hard code these things inside of your test either. So I'm going to change something real quick. So I'm going to create the location, and I expect when I save it, it's just going to change the latitude and longitude. Like we can't really say for certain that it's going to be one way or the other. So this kind of tests like, okay, I'm using GeoCoder and it works. The second thing that we wanted to test was the issue that we were running our tests like 40% slower than before. 40% slower is quite a bit more challenging. And we had to be connected to the internet all the time. So again, this is every single location that I create is going to call out to the internet, get me my Latin long, and save it back into the database. So I have to do an extra database call. I have to reach out to the internet, and then I got to save it. So those are like 3 additional things that I don't need to be running every single time. So there's this concept inside of programming called basically you're going to record your web request using a gem called VCR. Yep. So in a time of the dinosaurs, we went to Blockbuster and got stuff on Friday nights. And then there was this thing called Be Kind Rewind, you know, like remember VCR? Everyone remembers VCR cassettes here. But the idea is that like I can record things over this like VHS tape, and then I can play it and I can rewind it and things like that. And that's kind of where VCR came from. It's basically going to hook into your test suite. It's going to record it once, and it's going to save it. And then every single time that I need to make a request again, I don't reach out to the internet, but I actually just play this cassette. So it's like mimicking the actual request and response that I've gotten. We'll kind of see what we've got here. So I'm going to go to the gem file. It says that I need to, well, it says that I need all of this stuff, but let's go inside of our curriculum and find it. So we're going to add in something for WebMock and gem VCR. When I bundle install, it installs everything for me, and it says I need to configure the library. I need to add all of this stuff inside of the configuration. I'm going to go here, create something called new folder called support. And this is all in your curriculum, so you don't need to memorize all of these steps. I'm going to create a vcr.rb file and configure VCR. Now, this is the configuration for VCR. It's very specific, like the language that they're using here is very specific to VCR. So it's basically saying, I'm going to use WebMock, and that every time I record something, like record a HTTP request and response, I'm going to actually just save it into this particular folder, which will be generated. And since I added this file, I just want to make sure I required it. It says root join spec/support anything.rb, so I think this is already good to go. And all you really got to do for this location spec is just do VCR to turn it on. Let's run this test. Oh God, what's going on here? Okay, locations controller. Let's jump over to locations controller spec. All right, it says that I'm going to be creating a bunch of locations which need GeoCoder, which means I just need to turn on VCR as well. VCR, true. Please work. So let's take a let's keep a close eye on the on this amount of time it took. So it took 1.97 seconds to run this particular test. If you take a look inside of my fixtures, VCR cassettes, and all of this kind of stuff, you will see that this is a recording of both the request and the response. So here's the request that was sent over, and here's the response that came back. So instead of reaching out to the internet this time, it's just going to read this cassette and play it back to make sure that it does exactly the same thing. It has all the responses status and the headers. It has a specific body. This is all the stuff that's being sent back from the server. So it took me 1.97 seconds to run it the first time, and then when I run it again, hopefully this will be faster. So 0.998, so 50% savings right there just by having VCR turned on. I can run it again just to verify. So it takes a certain amount of time to load, but the test finished in a faster amount of time. Oh, what happened? So 1.17. So it kind of changes per time, but you can kind of see overall it's faster than the original time that we ran it.
So
It's only for the testing.
What's that?
It's only for the testing or like PCR.
VCR is for testing only, so you don't have to continuously make calls while you're running your tests.
Kind of makes you independent of internet speed as well.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're in a place with very slow internet and you need to connect to the internet every single time, and you're running tests, in the U.S. it might take you an hour, and somewhere else it might take you 5. You know, and that's not a way to live, waiting there for 5 hours.
So if you change your request a tiny bit, text it.
What's
Or
that?
just gonna like give you the same response for your, just delete destroy method. Does it detect if you make a small change? And
It only runs the VCR tape if it's identical request.
Yes.
so if you change like change from like the Eiffel Tower to something else.
Yeah, it's still gonna change. Yeah. So if so, you see I created an Eiffel Tower here, and then since I turned on VCR, it's going to make the first time that it goes through, it's actually going to say like the Eiffel Tower. So if I were to change it to something else, to like the bean or something like that, this would change something. But that's why I have this test being a little bit more loose, right? Before it was like a specific number for the Latin long, but I'm saying when I save it, it's just going to change the locations, latitude and longitude. This will still pass, I'm fairly certain. Is it broken on my spec thing? I might need to just refresh it. So the way that I like re-record, I just do refresh equals true, and then bundle exec rspec, and then I'll re-record everything. It's probably a bad idea to re-record everything. Whoa, what's going on? HTTP request has been made that VCR doesn't know how to handle. The bean. I'm using the following cassette. GeoCode's the model on save, so I can just delete this cassette and run it once more. So now it has no cassette to run. Yeah, now it has no cassette, so I had to re-record it. I'm not exactly sure why that one's broken like that. If you want, I